Our next area of testing strategies that we want to look at is this idea and this distinction between manual and automatic testing, and what's the importance of either, why would we use either. So manual testing is just that, it's manually done. So if I, for example, need to test a piece of code, we have this piece of code and I need to see if it works on different web browsers. Well, all I do is I literally go and I open it up in each web browser and I visually check it to see if it looks good. If it does, then I give the check mark on each side, and then I put it into some sort of report and send it off to whoever needs to have that report, whoever needs to sign it or say that, yep, these things work. And that's manual testing. And you'll see that there's something sort of easy about this in the sense that we don't have to design anything for it. We just do. So we just figure out what needs to be done and we just immediately do it. So there's no real overhead to this. However, what if we needed to test a server for 15 million server calls at the same time? Let's say the server was guaranteed to work at 15 million server calls. How do we figure out if that 15 million will work or not work? That's going to be pretty hard for us manually to do. And maybe we'll do something like a beta test where we actually allow real users to use it. That's a smart way of doing it. But an even smarter way of doing it is to automatically test it so our users don't have to be the test cases. And to automatically test it takes time and it takes effort. And we actually get sort of like this graph going on here. So this is the effort required in the testing phase. So it's sort of like this reverse exponential graph right here. And this is the effort required in the dev phase for testing. So what this means is this is saying that if we don't spend any time at all in the development phase, so the red is dev, or let's do the terminology we've been using, the implementation phase. And their implementation, and then we'll say black here is the testing phase. So if we don't spend any time in development at all, you'll notice that there's an extremely high amount of time we're going to have to be spending in the testing phase. Where if we spend just a little bit of time planning and developing some test cases and actually designing the test software, because if we do automatic testing, that means we have to actually design more software, and we're going to have to test that software as well. We're going to have to come up with design documents. We're going to have to come up with ways that it's going to work and architecture and stuff like that. But if we spend that time in the implementation phase and the design phase and everything to get that to work, then we can reduce the test time by a whole lot. So this is the testing phase. And the problem is, a lot of companies won't spend the time to develop the software until they get into the testing phase. And so this means that as we're developing the software, we don't even think about testing. And then we actually have to go back, break apart the software again, and figure out how to put proper test cases in there. Where if we had just put test cases as we worked, we would have saved a whole lot of time later on. And what does this usually end up creating? Well, whenever we get to the testing phase and we've already done this, we've already not spent any time doing it, and we're looking at this amount of time to implement proper testing software, well, what we do is we skip the testing phase, or we do a really small set of manual tests and say, yep, looks good, and we push the software out. And that happens more often than not. So this is one of the biggest breakdowns in the software development process, is not developing proper testing software throughout the process. If you can see, all we need to do is develop just a little bit of testing as we work and throughout the implementation process, and we can actually save ourselves a whole bunch of time. And of course, this is an exact graph, but if I was looking at this as an exact graph, I would look and say, well, why don't we look to develop right around here? Because that's going to give us the minimum amount of effort and will give us the best chance. You know, this graph, of course, wouldn't stop here. It would probably do something like this, where it just slows over time. We can delete this line right there. But yeah, so overall, though, you can see the point here is that we would look for this idea of, well, we don't want to spend all of this extra time in implementation. It's not going to give us a whole lot of benefit later on. But it is very important to at least spend this amount of time in the implementation phase, because it'll save us money and it'll increase our quality over time. So the idea of manual versus automatic testing is important here. And I don't know if I'm going to really drill home how these connect, is that a lot of times the automatic testing is done in the implementation phase because we have to design software for it. So if we're designing automatic tests, we need to spend that time up front. It's going to have a lot of upfront cost. So with manual testing, it's quick. It's going to be straight away. We can just jump in and do it. There's no planning required. With automatic testing, though, there is a whole bunch of planning beforehand. We have to develop different software. We have to move through it. We have to verify it, and then we can actually use it. And that takes upfront cost, upfront time. However, in the long run, it saves us time. So understanding the distinction between those and understanding that it's important to basically create software create testing software is something that is important when you're creating your strategy.